Helen Hanlon Ward. I am Chookaneidi from the Iceberg house in Glacier Bay. I grew up in Hoonah, Alaska. My parents are John and Alberta Hanlon, and my paternal grandparents are Eli and Jenny Hanlon. Eli Hanlon Sr., former clan leader of the Wooshkitan. My Tlingit name is Just Teich from the Chookaneidi, and I was given a Wooshkitan name by my grandfather Eli Hanlon Sr., which is Wooshku. I currently live in Papillion, Nebraska, just outside Omaha, with my husband Ryan, who has been serving for 25 years. We were living in Juneau at the time. I was 17 years old, and actually that's not true, I was 16. And I remember this really vividly. I was in advanced placement English with Miss McKenna, and God rest her soul, she passed several years ago. And they had brought in an Air Force recruiter who wanted to talk to us. My then high school boyfriend had joined the Army, and was delayed enlisted and getting ready to leave. I was 16 years old. I was graduating high school early. I graduated at 17, and I really wanted to go to college, but we couldn't necessarily afford it, and I had significant doubts about my ability to get a scholarship and also to maintain the discipline to continue through college. And then I wondered, well, what am I going to do after that? This Air Force recruiter really had caught my attention. I initially delayed enlisted in the Army without the permission of my parents, and if you do that before you're 18, it kind of doesn't work. They wouldn't sign the paperwork, so we withdrew from that, and I came home the day that the Air Force recruiter had come in, and I told my mom, I have about 30 minutes to make an adult decision. And the Air Force recruiter called, and my parents agreed, and I delayed enlisted in the Air Force at the age of 17, and I went to basic at the age of 17. And I had delayed enlisted in the Army kind of around the same time my then high school boyfriend had. It was the cool thing to do. I don't know, they offered a lot of money for a sign-on bonus. I mean, to anybody, it was a lot of money. I think it was in excess of like $20,000. And I was lured in by that, and it sounded really great. And of course, my father, John, had come back, and he was like, yeah, that's not happening. And I was like, okay. And, well, what about the Marine Corps, Dad? And I am the youngest of three girls. My father is very protective of his girls, and he doesn't have any sons. So the Marine Corps was out of the question, absolutely. And, my dad said, when I came home about the Air Force, and I explained all of the reasons that I wanted to join. Number one, it just seemed like maybe it was a little bit more prestigious, although I think all services are prestigious regardless of the amount of harassment we give each other for what we do. And they also had a community college of the Air Force, which is accredited. And so all of the training that you got as you were coming up as a new airman counted towards college credit. And that was really important to me because I really wanted to go to college. I really wanted to, start learning things and find my place in the world and to get an education so that I could contribute. And that was really the primary reason. And I also think that being able to get the job that I wanted, which was intelligence, was really important to me, and I was able to get that, thankfully. Being a 17-year-old leaving your parents to go join the military in peacetime is still scary. I can't imagine the kids that joined after 9/11. You get off the bus, it's super dark, you fly through the night, especially from Alaska, Juneau, you go Juneau to Anchorage, they do your final medical checks, then you get on a plane, and you fly through the night, you're exhausted, and there were two other girls from Alaska with me on that flight, and also in my basic training flight, and I was by far the youngest. I'd never been to Texas, really, and that's where it was, San Antonio, Texas, and Texas in July for an Alaska girl, probably not the brightest thing to do. It was hot, it was humid, there were bugs that I had never seen before, and, snakes, and all of these things, and a lot of yelling, but you learn pretty quick what you can and can't do, and how to fall in line, and how to take an order, and when to respond and say yes, sir, and when to just sit there and be quiet. And in the beginning, I think everybody does this, oh my gosh, what did I do? And a week or two into it, you start to, for lack of a better term, you really start to assimilate and find normalcy. in the airport. I don't think I'd ever seen a cricket before. I know that sounds really silly, but that's one of the first things my husband asks all the time. What do you remember? And I'm like, well, we got off the plane and we went where we were supposed to assemble because there's signs everywhere. And I went to the restroom and I freaked out. Literally thought I was going to scream, and I jumped back because there was this giant cricket that jumped on my leg. It just seems so silly now. I'm going to basic training to go join the military to potentially, participate in conflicts against enemies that are pretty scary, but I'm screaming over a cricket. That makes sense. So, boot camp was a little scary in the beginning. You're wearing civilian clothes and you think you can do whatever you want, and no, you're going to go change and get issued all these uniforms, and as a female, you have to put your hair up, and it has to be a certain way, and it has to be really tight, and it has to look perfect all the time, and you learn, back then, you learned how to shine your boots and take care of your uniform. That was not that bad. You learned how to be neat. I still fold my shirts in 6-inch squares thanks to basic training. I've been doing that for nearly 20 years. There's a lot of things that were really great. I was pretty athletic as a young person. I swam on the swim team. I was a runner. That did not prepare me for what I was going to encounter in basic. We ran a lot, but I'm grateful for it. We also had a lot of issues with young women who were in our basic training flight that were too thin and got more time to eat, whereas the rest of us got about 2 minutes to eat each meal, and if you didn't eat really fast, you weren't going to eat, so you learned to eat really quickly. It was interesting. We learned a lot, had a good time. I made some friends that I still talk to. The 2 girls that flew with me from Alaska were really good girls, and one of them still serving, and the other one separated a couple of years ago, but overall it was a really interesting experience. In fact, just recently, so one of the things that you do in basic is you have to learn about your entire chain of command, from you, little baby airman, all the way up to the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. Well, when I was in basic training, the Chief Master Sergeant of the Air Force, that's the highest ranking enlisted person in the military. Every brand new airman, or most non-commissioned officers, dream about making chief. And, if you're really lucky, you dare to dream about becoming a Chief Master Sergeant of the Air Force. Well, his name at the time was Chief Master Sergeant of the Air Force James Roy. And, I'd probably not intern at the interview, but I have to tell you the story. A couple months ago, probably about 6 months ago, I was on a business call with another company, and lo and behold, James Roy is on the phone, and I freaked out for 5 minutes, and I was like, oh my God, it's Chief Roy. I can't believe I'm actually talking to you. And he's just, it's okay, calm down. But, you learn things like that. You learn about self-control. You learn about how much stronger you are than you ever thought. And, that's one thing I'll always be grateful for from the military. In the near 10 years that I spent in the military, it came from any race that you can imagine. I've had people of color tell me that I don't know what racism feels like, or that I, as a Native Alaskan, have no room to speak or say that I understand what racism is, and I have had people treat me different simply because I'm a little darker than they are, or because of some of the food that I would bring in for lunch, or just in general conversation about Native American Heritage Month. I was usually the only Native American in my unit, much less a Tlingit from Southeast. Some of the racism was a little harder to swallow, and it's kind of hard to defend yourself against that when you're in the military, depending on who's the actual aggressor with it. If it's somebody that outranks you, it's uncomfortable, and you find ways to deal with it and to tell them. And most people are really responsive to that. They're like, oh gosh, I didn't mean it that way. I didn't realize that was that inappropriate. But you have the occasional people that just don't care. I was brought up very strictly, and I'm appreciative for that every day. I was brought up by parents who are some of the hardest working people I know. And even to this day, my 75-year-old father is wrapping up his first full year of studying for his master's. So those are the kind of people that raised me. So I would say a lot of it's upbringing. A lot of it is, the people that helped raise me. Not to say that my parents needed that help, but in any child's life, you have this community that kind of participates. But the neighbors I grew up with in Hoona, lived in Juneau as well, and I stayed close to that family, and they had a lot to do with it. My aunts, my uncles, and even, my friends. I had friends that I was in high school with that joined the military, and when they went, I was like, oh man, if you can do that, so can I. Or, they'd write letters like, you've got this, just keep pushing. And so it's that community/family aspect, I would say. I actually went to both Iraq and Afghanistan. The Air Force is a little different with how they do deployments, or at least they used to be. It's changed. I mean, it changes a lot. I actually was with C-130 aircraft, which sometimes in Juneau they'll come around. They're the ones with the propellers, and they're kind of loud. They're low and slow, but they can carry a lot. So I was with them, and my job was to do research on the enemies that could potentially be trying to take them down, help them with their maneuvers to make sure that, hey, if you're getting shot at by this, and they'll know by their radar, this is the maneuver you have to do, or if you're doing this, this is what's there. I kind of have to talk around that just due to the fact that I'd like to not go to jail and I still have a security clearance. So, helping them, and then also talking about, like, evasion techniques if they were to go down, and then preparing them for what intelligence reporting indicated as far as, if they were going to fly north of a base, then we thought that there is a group of this particular enemy there, and they have these types of weapons, and this is what altitude you need to fly at to make sure you don't get shot down. So that's what I did in Iraq a couple of times, and we would go 4 months on, 4 months off, which is actually a really great schedule because you got there and you had time to get into your job, and just as you were starting to get really into your routine, you got to come home, which sounds exhausting, but it was actually kind of a welcome relief because you get to come home and recuperate for a little bit and then train up and get ready to go again. Afghanistan was a little bit different because at that point, when I was at C-130s, we were deploying with our unit. So, everybody traveled in packs of 6. You had the aircrew when they brought their intel person. We were glued together. Well, and actually one of those times was different as well. There was an operation that we did that put these, basically like a big Connex, what's the civilian term for that? Kind of like a trailer in the back of that aircraft, and they'd fly in circles and literally feel like they were drilling holes in the sky because you had, the guys on the ground that were out there doing Humvee patrols and looking for the bad guys or trying to find, like, the improvised explosive devices or what have you. And sometimes their radios would work really, really well, but sometimes, just like now with the cell phone, they'd hit a dead zone. So we had that mission that allowed us to put that big thing in the back of the plane. And in that, there were about 20 people that were basically like the 911 call for, all of these guys and gals that were on the ground that really needed it. And that was really cool. That's actually where that Joint Service Achievement Medal came from. That was a great unit. They were called the Joint Communications Service Element, and they were out of Headquarters, U.S. Central Command. I'm still really good friends with some of those people. That was really cool. Probably one of the best missions we ever got to do, just trying to support those guys and gals on the ground that really needed it. I'd like to think that we had something to do with saving a lot of lives, which is important and really cool to be able to stay in the middle of a conflict like that, because most people are doing the exact opposite, but usually to the bad guys. And then Afghanistan was totally different too. With a couple times, with the things that I did there, like I mentioned, when I was in Iraq, one time I was on a weapons intelligence team, and what that means is you have the explosive ordnance disposal guys. People make movies about them all the time because they're the crazy ones that run towards the weapons when everybody else is running away because they want to go figure out what it is and defuse it or blow it up and make sure nobody else can use it. So I got to do intelligence for them, and when you're like 19 or 20 years old in southern Iraq and on Nazariya, and you're cruising around in a big Humvee with a bunch of guys and, just shooting the stuff and looking out the window, making sure you're not running over anything that looks creepy. And you have the Italians and the Japanese with you, and, you're doing all this crazy stuff at this weird base where you're staying in a tent, and the Army's actually in hardened billets, it doesn't really occur to you that you have a bunch of C4 in the back of your vehicle until you get home and you're like, oh, that would have been really bad if we would have hit something. So that was interesting, really fun, probably one of my best assignments. Really, really enjoyed that. We were fortunate, we didn't lose anybody. The Italians did. That was really hard to see them have to go through that. But we did that for the bottom third of Iraq because it was so much less populated. We had several teams. There were 5 or 6 of us, teams of X number of people. I was assigned to Air Force Special Operations Command in 2007 to go be an MQ-1B Predator operator. The MQ-1B Predator is an armed unmanned aerial vehicle, and we flew missions every day in Iraq and Afghanistan, but I was sitting comfortably in air conditioning in Las Vegas. So depending on if you consider that or not, I don't know, I always struggled with that because I'm like, well, but I'm home. So I'm not really, I'm involved in the conflict, but I'm not in it, if that makes any sense. Now, we did have some people that were a lot more affected by the things that they had to do and the things that they saw, but I adhere to the AFSOC, Air Force Special Operations Command creed of, we don't talk about it. So that was an amazing mission. I'm still very good friends with my commander from that unit, and I was in that unit for a year, and then I got moved to a traditional intelligence unit because that unit was moving to another place, and I wasn't allowed to move because I had just gotten to Vegas. And Afghanistan was far and away the best and worst assignment I've ever had. And the reason I say that is because that experience from the Predator really got me into what we call the Intel Surveillance and Reconnaissance, or ISR, world. And, I learned about how to stack aircraft, not nearly as well as the professionals that do that for a full-time living, but as far as altitude and what Intel aircraft does what and how to work with them and how to prepare a plan so that the guys on the ground could get what they needed so that they wouldn't come home in a box. So they had eyes and ears to be able to carry out their mission without having to worry about, what's on the other side of that hill. We could do that for them. So when I was in Afghanistan, that was part of my job. When we first got there, we were at Headquarters International Security Assistance Force. It's a teeny little forward operating base straight smack dab in the middle of Kabul, kind of across the quote-unquote green zone from where the embassy was. And the American presence there was really small. We had a lot of NATO there, which was really cool because I hadn't spent a lot of time with NATO. I really enjoyed that. We didn't get American food for a very long time. That was kind of hard. The work was addictive for me. I think I'd work anywhere from 12 to 18 hours a day, 6 days a week, and then on Thursday mornings, I took an extra 4 hours to rest. And by that I mean 2 hours of sleep, take a real shower, and then Skype my parents so they weren't worried. And that was pretty amazing to be part of that. We were the first people that they would call when somebody went missing. We had a couple guys go missing. One day I walked in and I looked at all the screens and it's just like you see on TV. You see all these feeds and coordinates and stuff like that. And I had a brand new crew. We had just taken what we called the double down from Iraq, which means all of the assets were coming from Iraq over to Afghanistan, all the planes, all the people. So, we had a lot more planes. We had a lot more stuff going on. It was getting kind of hairy. We were getting ready for the election. We were taking pictures of the whole country. And one day I walked in, and I had a routine. I went for a run every morning, and then I'd stop in my PT gear and check on everybody, make sure everybody was good, and then go get cleaned up and come into work. So one day after my run, I stopped in, and I'm like, hey, why are these all in one spot? Oh, yeah, hey, Staff Sergeant, sorry, this guy didn't show up to formation. I'm like, what? How long? And Bo Bergdahl had been missing for 4 hours. I worked for about 30 hours straight after that. Yeah, we looked for him for a long time. Best and worst, like I said, one of the best and worst things I ever got to do. I was a combat lifesaver. I had to use that more than I care to admit. The green zone isn't always green, we'll put it that way. some guy got lost in August of 2009, so he says, looking for something. And when he stopped at the gate to ask a question, mind you, NATO base, so distancing, as far as like how close barracks are and stuff like that, doesn't necessarily apply. They didn't learn from Kobar Towers what we learned as far as how to keep things away and how to make sure that you have less people get hurt and or killed. Well, when he stopped to ask for directions, he must have pressed the right button and his car blew up. So my barracks were less than 25 feet from that. No, that's not right. It's probably about 50 feet. I've always had horrible distance measuring. Thankfully we didn't lose any Americans. We had a couple of Macedonians get really, really hurt, and several Afghans, to include children, didn't make it. Yeah, it was a hard day. I loved it in Iraq because, there were a couple of times, like one time I was going to Iraq in, that was the first trip that year. So it would have been like January of 2006. And, depends on how you're going, if you're going with your unit or if you're going, in what they call it in lieu of, or a joint expeditionary tasking, which means basically by yourself until you get to a certain point. And that one I was doing in lieu of. So I was going by myself with a bunch of Air Force people, but, everybody has different jobs. You don't know them. You don't know any of them. It's kind of scary, to be honest, when you're that young. So we stopped at Bangor, Maine, which is a normal place to stop. And, they are some of the nicest people. But on the way out, going to Iraq, we stopped in Bangor, and I'll be perfectly honest with you, probably about 99.9% of us, the last thing that we do is we go straight to the bar, we drink about 4 beers, and we call our family. So I'm in the bar having a beer, and I turned around, and I recognized this guy, and it's actually a guy that I grew up with and went to grade school, middle school, and high school with in Juneau. So that was probably one of the coolest things that's ever happened to me. He was in the Army. He was coming back from Iraq. I was in the Air Force. I was going. So it was really, it's just incredible to see somebody from home and to see somebody that I knew and somebody that was coming home and it was okay. That was really cool. And then on the way back through Bangor, anytime you come home, it's like you see in all of the coming home shows. They literally just, they're clapping. There's lines of them. They have flags. They offer you their cell phone because yours isn't hooked up yet, so you can call your family. It's pretty amazing. It's really cool. The first time you come home and you see that, you get a little choked up. I don't know anybody, male or female, that doesn't get choked up from that when they're coming home, because you're like, wow, my whole world. Basically, it feels like you stop and you go into Groundhog Day because all you do is work. You can do really just a few things when you're deployed. You can work out, and you can sleep, and you can eat. And that's really about it, unless you're crazy, which I was. And when I was in Afghanistan, I also finished my undergrad because I really wanted to get it done. And that was online. And there were a lot of us that were crazy, and we're working on degrees and stuff. But sometimes like Afghanistan, I got 17 days notice to go there, so I couldn't drop school in the middle of that, waste all the time that I'd spent on it. Plus, it was my last semester, so, there's not a lot you can do. So it's kind of nice to get home and feel like, the world stopped, or the world hasn't stopped. But it's a little weird because you don't necessarily get to keep up with everything, and it's a little frustrating when you get back because the little things that people freak out about, like, oh man, I really wanted to go to the store today and get Honeycrisp apples. They don't have those, and you just look at them like, are you seriously upset about that right now? That's what you're upset about? Okay. It's hard not to catch yourself doing that. I did that with friends or family or my ex-husband, and he was also military. We actually deployed together once. That was actually really fun. But, it's interesting. It kind of changes you, whether people admit it or not. It definitely changes you. I have one living sister, and we keep in contact pretty well. My aunt and uncles are usually through Facebook or any other social media, just because there are a lot of them. So if I called all of them once a week, I would live on the phone. There's a little bit of stress and pressure, but there's also a lot of fun. There's this the cohesion and the camaraderie, if you're in a really good unit, I mean, nothing can beat that. I have friends from when I was stationed at Little Rock Air Force Base or in the 777 Expeditionary Airlift Squadron. We still were close. We talked in some way, shape, or form at least 2 or 3 times a month. One of them, actually, before all this stuff started, I was actually out at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Ohio early March, and guy I served with in the 777 EAS, we made it a point to go have lunch together because I know he lives there. You can't beat that. There's no friendship that can be closer than what some of us have. But yeah, there's times of stress. I mean, when Bo Bergdahl went missing, I was seriously awake for a very long time. And I got to the point where I wasn't even tired anymore. I was just so wired and on adrenaline. Anytime somebody went missing and we were called in, I was just wired, and it was all I could think about. And I'd skip meals, and that's all that mattered was doing my job to help somebody else do their job so that they could go find them. And I don't really know what it's like to literally have somebody's life in your hands. I'm not a doctor, I'm not a surgeon, but I took that responsibility very seriously. Back at that point, I was still a marathon runner. That actually started because I was in Iraq, and I had a boss who was he was a probably mid-grade captain. His name is Casey. I can't remember his last name to save my life. But he was a distance runner, and and we were working 12 to 14 hours a day. And one of my roommate at the time, and we were roommates back at Little Rock Air Force Base where we were stationed, was going and playing volleyball with people and doing stuff, and I was like, yeah, that's not really my thing. So I worked out a lot, and they were going to do the Boston Marathon in Iraq, and I was like, that sounds really cool. I've never run a marathon before. Hey, I'll try that. So Casey, the captain, taught me different ways to train and how to train for distance, and eventually I got hooked on running, and it became truly an addiction. I was running 30, 40 miles a week. It was a huge base. It's actually the city of from the Bible. And we actually, in Iraq, we were working to help excavate Abraham's house, which, by the way, still stood when I was there, and the ziggurat of which is absolutely beautiful. So we were able to run around that. And I did run the Boston Marathon in Iraq, and I did not die like I thought I might. So I had to walk downstairs backwards for a couple weeks after that because I couldn't actually get my legs to straighten out because I was so sore. But so I ran a lot in all of my deployments. I read a lot, and I got a lot of teasing when I stood watch in Afghanistan because I got some books from a dear friend of mine, and they happened to be the Twilight books. And when the generals would walk in, they'd be like, "Hallie, are you really reading Twilight?" And I'm like, "Yes. Yes, I am, and I am Team Jacob, and he's my boyfriend right now because I don't have one." And they would make fun of me because, grown person reading books that were probably meant for mid to late teens, but it was entertaining and it kept me busy, and it was something to do. And I was always doing that or going to school, or really in southern Iraq, I got to meet people from other countries like Italy or Japan, and that was pretty amazing. And the same thing with the headquarters in Afghanistan. We had Macedonians and Brits and Aussies that were in our building, and I just liked hearing from them and learning about their experiences, especially other women in the military, because their services are different than ours. And they loved me because my mom sent me a package every single week without fail in Afghanistan, and on occasion those would include jarred smoked strips of salmon. So I was very popular. The opportunity to go on temporary duty to Korea a couple of times, and the first time I was there, I was 8th Army, and literally in this big hole in a mountain. It's called CP Tango, and you had to take a bus for an hour or a helicopter for 20 minutes to get there, and walk into this hole in a mountain and do your job basically. But I loved Korea, and that was just outside Seoul. And then the other time I went to Korea, we went to Osan Air Base, which is in Sungtan. And Korea, I don't know what it is. It made me feel like I was home. A different version of home, but just how they feel about their culture and their food and the respect that they give to their elders. It just really, I loved it there. And I tried very hard to get there for a while. It just never panned out. and I had the opportunity to go to Tokyo, which was amazing, and Sotocano in Honduras was really cool, but I didn't really get to go anywhere. We were just there trying to drop off some stuff and come back. And I mean, all over the United States, just for different exercises or, for trainings and stuff. But now on leave, I went on a couple cruises. But most of my leave, and this carried on through today, when you have family back home, you don't really take a lot of vacations. You go see your family. That may not be a vacation for most, but I don't really know of anything that makes me feel better than coming home. When I came back from Afghanistan, I got really, really sick. I spent about 9 days in critical care. I have several autoimmune diseases, and it's really frustrating. I'm no longer a runner, I can tell you that. So I got really, really sick, and, I have permanent scar tissue in my right kidney as a result of that hospital stay. I'm lucky I got to keep it. And when I came back from Afghanistan, I wasn't even home yet, and I knew exactly when I was going to leave again. In fact, I tried to stay longer on that deployment because I loved my job so much. But came back from Afghanistan on the 9th of September 2009. I remember that because it was a day and a half after my oldest living sister at the time had her son on Labor Day on her birthday, which I thought was great. And I got sick about 2 weeks later, 3 weeks, somewhere in there, and as a result of that illness, I was deemed unemployable indefinitely. And after so long of that, they initiate a medical review board on you. And my medical review board went technically from March of 2010 until October of 2010, at which point they came back and they put me on what's called the Temporary Disability Retirement List, which meant that I was going to be retired from the military at the ripe old age of 26. So I was fortunate in that I had been called up to the headquarters for the base several months prior, like right after I got well and started doing better, even though I wasn't allowed to deploy. And I was doing protocol for then Brigadier General Terence O'Shaughnessy, who is now 4-star General Terence O'Shaughnessy, who runs U.S. Northern Command, and then Colonel Barry Cornish, now Major General Barry Cornish. And I did protocol for them and basically just made sure that, all of the customs and courtesies and traditions that the United States Air Force had in place since its inception for officers of their caliber were followed, and for their visitors who were distinguished as well. I really liked that job. It was lots of fun. So when I got the notice that I was being put on that list, General O'Shaughnessy and Colonel Cornish said, well, what are you going to do? Are you going to fight it? Or, what do you think? So I reached out to the Air Force attorney that was appointed for me and said, do you think I have a shot? Am I ever going to be able to deploy again? And we went through my medical record, and I wasn't ever going to be able to deploy again without being a risk to myself or others, just because I needed to be within so many hours of being able to get care, just in case. So I had a retirement ceremony on probably, I think it was like the 19th of November in 2010. I basically out-processed it. I had a bunch of leave and stuff like that, and I gave my last salute on the 19th of November 2010, and then I got another job. I was on terminal leave, but I was enlisted, so I could get a different job. I got another job 3 weeks later, and did that for a little while. But my very last day in uniform was in November of 2010, but I wasn't actually separated until January of 2011. It was pretty hard, especially when you're getting out and it's not your own terms. It's because they say that you can't do something that you really believe to your core that you can, because it's all you know. So it was pretty hard. But I brought my parents down to Vegas, which is where we were, for the ceremony, and they got to see that, which is really important to me. Now Major General Barry Cornish did it, and it took me a couple years to get over the fact that I was never going to be able to go back over there and do my job. I learned pretty quickly as a young airman that no matter how much I thought I was right, that I'm not always right. As an adult leader, I really appreciate that, because I meet a lot of people that just never seem to get that they're not always right. And I also really, really appreciate the GI Bill. I can't tell you how much that is a game changer and very much an overlooked benefit, and people don't use it. And that makes me really sad, because it's incredible. I technically graduated with my undergrad in May of 2010. I was still in the military. When I got out and got retired, So I was on a temporary disability retirement list for a while, and I worked for a very large defense contracting company, traveling all over the United States to teach the Army and the Marine Corps how to ask for those intelligence air assets and how to get them quickly and efficiently, because they would say, hey, I need this, and they didn't really know if they wanted that. They just thought they did. They would say, I want a purple pen. Now, why do you want a purple pen? Do you want a purple pen because it's going to write purple, or do you just want the outside to be purple? And there's a language barrier there because all of us speak different languages in the services. So you have to go out and teach them about, what the assets were, how they worked, what they did, how they could help them, what the processing time looked like, if it was instant, if it might be a week, if it might be 3 days. And that was really fun. And there was a big team of us. There was 41 of us that traveled all over the country to do that. So that September, 41 of us lost our jobs in one day because the contract went away. Just before that, I had been out to Camp Lejeune training the Marine Corps, and I met a gentleman who is a national hero, and he got shot down over Baghdad in the first Gulf War and taken and tortured by Saddam for 37 days. Amazing American. And he had just started his own company, a very small business called Joint Mission Essential Training Solutions, or JMENS. And, hey, Hallie, do you want a job? Yes, I would love a job. So I was unemployed for like 2 weeks. I went out and worked for him. I was in Vegas. We had a couple of us in Vegas, and we would, again, travel all over the United States. At that point, it was anywhere from 10 to 14 weeks a year training the Marine Corps specifically. A couple of years after that, about a year and a half into that, I was working on my first master's in human relations and human resources. He asked if I would stand up his human resources department as my internship, which was required for that particular master's program. So I did, which was a lot of fun. We were small, but we still, there's still requirements. There are a lot of laws and rules and regulations with human resources. So we stood that up, and about 6 months after that, he said, hey, what do you think about maybe purchasing the majority of the company? I said, why would I do that? There's a lot of advantages for you. So we talked about those. I'm a female most days. I am Alaskan Native, and I'm a service-disabled veteran, and I'm a combat veteran, and, the list goes on. And in the government contracting world, that means a lot. So May 1st, 2014, I became the majority owner and CEO of a defense contracting company. When I did that, we had 13 people, and Raz, who was my business partner, and our team and I, we still went out and trained the Marine Corps ourselves because it helped offset the cost for us, and then we tried growing the business. Raz and I had very different ideas about certain things, and it's not that any idea was right or wrong, it's just they were different. We're also at different stages in our lives. So that fall of 2016, it got to the point where we were like, this isn't going to work. So we negotiated for me to sell it back to him. When I sold back to Raz, we had a total of 100 employees on staff. About 80 of those were full-time equivalent. The rest were part-time or on call. I would say that our team was pretty successful because that was a lot of growth in 2.5 years, but it was awesome. We had a really good time. I started a second master's. I got an executive master's in business administration from the University of Nebraska at Omaha. That was probably the hardest program I've ever been through. And I hire accountants and economists because they're smarter than me, and I hated those two subjects. I went to work for a couple of different companies smaller businesses, to do business development, try to grow the business, do some networking for them, do some writing, some recruiting, proposal drafts, and things like that. So the last one that I was with, really great company here locally, lost a big contract. They had to let 3 of us go. I was one of those 3. I got to take a month and a half off, and my mom was coming, so it was perfect because I could do whatever I wanted with her all day, every day. And we got to go explore and do stuff. And I met these 2 gentlemen. They had been in business for 15 years with a really great company, and they're doing about $22 million a year in their business lines. So they have a government contracting company, they have a vineyard, they have a couple of other things. They're all over the place. And they asked me to come over and do HR for them, and I thought that would be really fun, and it was. And in the course of that, I met a couple of other gentlemen who had just started a government contract firm and had a facility clearance, and clearances are like gold. I've had my clearance since I was 17 years old. I have no semblance of personal privacy, and that's totally fine. I don't really care. And I had a consulting company on the side for over a year trying to get this to go through and trying to get my own facility clearance because I wanted my own company. Now, somebody was offering, would you like to buy this one? I'm like, you have a facility clearance? Yes, I would. So I bought that in August of last year, and we won a subcontract probably 3 weeks later, that we had worked on together as a team. And we right now provide mission planning and intelligence support services to the Standoff Munitions and Applications Center at Barksdale Air Force Base in Louisiana. And I am trying to roll the dice and grow this company too. We'll see. I can't say this for all veterans because, every era of veterans receives different treatment when they come home from a conflict. Our friends and family members that came home from Vietnam didn't deserve the way that they were treated, and they don't today. But I personally get very defensive over any branch of the military unless it's from a fellow vet. It's kind of like a code maybe where, if people, like if an Army guy or a Marine Corps guy says, hey, Chair Force, and that's an ongoing joke because they don't think we do anything. And that's okay. I'm okay with that because they serve too. But if somebody who didn't serve starts saying that, I don't take it, as a human being, I will always advocate for peace over anything like that because anybody that wants for and thinks it's a good thing is, in my opinion, very wrong because there's so much death and destruction and the after effects even from those who aren't dead. It just isn't worth it. I lost a lot of friends in Iraq and Afghanistan, and I've lost friends since then due to the after effects. I would not be here if I didn't join the military. I don't know what I'd be doing. Before I joined the military, I wanted to go to law school, maybe get into politics, which I can't believe I just said that out loud, but things are different back then. Family and culture are really what kept me going. I can remember walking back to my tent in Afghanistan, and I'd sing Blanket songs just to feel closer to home. My parents tried to raise me as traditionally as they were able. I'm really grateful for that, and I think that HUNA has a lot to do with that because if it wasn't for them being raised there, that I wouldn't be as close to traditional as I'm able to, even though I live in Omaha, Nebraska, and I'm probably the only Tlingit for like a 2-mile radius. But I would say that family and culture are really, really important, and that hopefully any one of our people or anyone that joins the military, regardless of what their race or ethnicity or creed is, hopefully they can find something from their family and their culture that helps them.